Okay. So chapter 12. So let me read verses 1 to 6. First, Ve'ele malchei haaretz asher hiku b'nei Yisrael v'yirshu et artzam be'ever hayardein mizracha hashamesh minachal Arnon ad har Hermon v'chol ha'arava mizracha. These are the kings of the land that the people of Israel killed and inherited their land on the other side of the Jordan eastward toward, well, it says toward the sun rising, Mizracha Hashemesh. So just toward the sunrise, so eastward so the east side of the Jordan River from Nachal Arnon, the Arnon stream, really, it says the valley, but it's a stream from the Arnon stream to the Hermon mountain, and all of the valley, the Arava valley, eastward. Sichon melech ha'emori hayoshev becheshbon moshel me Aroer asher al sfat Nachal Arnon v'toch hanachal v'chatzi hagilad va'ad yabok hanachal gevul b'nei Ammon. Sichon, the king of the Amorites, was in Heshbon, and he ruled from Aroer, which is on the bank of the Arnon stream, and in the stream. That's why I guess they're translating it as valley, because how can you define the border from in the stream? So maybe it makes more sense as the valley of Arnon, and half of Gilead until the Yabok River or stream, which is the border with the Ammonites. Ve'ha'arava ad yam kinrot mizracha. So it's interesting that they're calling it kinrot. We saw that a couple chapters before, as opposed to Kinneret. So the Arava Valley to the Kinrot Lake or Sea of Kinrot eastward, Va'ad Yam Ha'arava, Yam HaMelach Mizracha, and then to the Arava Sea, which is the Salt Sea eastward, Derech Beit HaYeshimot, by way of Beit Yeshimot, Umei Teman Tachat Ashdot HaPisga, and from to the south, under the slopes of Pisgah. Ugevul Og Melech HaBashan Miyeter HaRephaim Hayoshev Ba'ashtarot Uve'edrei. And the border of Og, king of Bashan, was from Yeter HaRephaim, who were in Ashtarot and Edrei. Umoshel Bahar Hermon Uvesalcha Uvechol Bashan Ad Gvul HaGeshuri VeHama'achati VeChatzi HaGilad Gvul Sichon Melech Heshbon. And he ruled from the Hermon mountain and in Salcha and all of the Bashan until the border with the Geshurites and the Maakites and half of Gilad, the boundary with Sichon, king of Heshbon. Moshe Eved Adonai Uvenei Yisrael Hikum Vayitna Moshe Eved Adonai Yerushala Reuveni Belagadi Belachatzi Shevet Hamenashi. Moses, the servant of God, and the people of Israel killed them, and Moses, the servant of God, gave it, that is, all that territory that was just described, as an inheritance to the Reubenites, the Gadites, and half the tribe of Manasseh. So these first 6 sentences, these 6 verses are a reminder of what happened in the book of Numbers in terms of the initial conquest that the people of Israel were involved in. And that wasn't even the land of Israel, that was on the eastern side of the Jordan where they were. And so the initial settlement was for the Reubenites and the Gadites and half the tribe of Manasseh. So let's look at the commentary below. Beyond the Jordan toward the sun rising. This victory was gained by Moses before the history of Joshua began. It's included for the sake of completeness, right? So we might wonder, why bother reminding us of this here when we're talking about what Joshua did? So Rashi says it's to complete the picture of where the Israelites are at this point. The valley of Arnon, it ran from west to east in the south of Transjordan through the original territory of Moab, emptying its waters into the Dead Sea. Before its conquest by Moses, Sichon, king of the Amorites, had driven the Moabites south of the Arnon. Right? So if you can kind of picture in your mind's eye the people of Israel coming out of Egypt through the Sinai, south of the Dead Sea to the eastern side of it. And then they waged these wars against Sichon and Og and conquered their territories.
I was going to ask, it said the Salt Sea, and I was wondering if that was the Dead Sea. I guess it
no,
is.
that's the Dead Sea. And
so was it ever called that? I mean, other than
in modern Hebrew, it's called Yam HaMelach, the Salt Sea. I think in the book of Genesis, it's called the Salt Sea, because as Sodom and Gomorrah, that's where Sodom and Gomorrah are. So yeah, it's also called Yam HaArava, the Arava Sea, which makes sense too, because of the Arava Valley. But yeah, it's so it's interesting why it's not called the Salt Sea in English. You know, the Great Salt Lake in Utah. Why isn't that called the Dead Lake? So yeah, I don't know how these things happen, but yeah, in biblical Hebrew, it's the Salt Sea.
Isn't that kind of like a nickname, Dead Sea? Because it came from just, the explanation is kind of like, oh, there was so much salt that, nothing can live in it. The fish don't live in there. So then it's like a nick, maybe.
No, I think if you look in an atlas, it's not just a nickname, that's the official name. Yeah. Okay, so we go on 69 in the commentary, Mount Hermon in the north. The Sidonians called it Sirion, which means breastplate. The Amorites named it Sneer. It was also known as Sion, perhaps meaning elevated, rising as it does to a height of over 9,000 feet. Okay, different names for the mountain. The Arava, see on chapter 11. Heshbon, see on chapter 9. Aroer, slightly north of the Arnon. Its location is here specified to distinguish it from the town of that name in the territory of the Ammonites. And the middle of the valley, this phrase is to be understood as part of the object of ruled. The central area of the valley was included in the kingdom of Sichon. Gilad or Gilead, north and south of the river Yabok. Yabok, running from west to east between the mountains of Gilead, some 50 to 60 miles north of the Arnon, the modern Wadi Zerka. Josephus describes Sichon's territory as resembling an island, the river Arnon being its southern limit, the river Yabok bounding its northern side, while the Jordan itself runs along by it on the west. The Sea of Kinnerot, the second lake into which the Jordan flows in the north, after which it continues its course until it finally reaches the Dead Sea. It's also known as the Sea of Gennesaret and the Sea of Tiberias, and is about 14 miles in length and 6 in breadth. The district was one of great beauty and fertility. its fruits being figs. Beit Yeshimot, immediately to the northeast of the Dead Sea and the south of the plains of Moab. Pisgah, a few miles due east of the northern end of the Dead Sea, it was the name of a spur of Mount Nebo, from whence Moses viewed the Holy Land, which he was not permitted to enter. The Rephaim, they are named among the peoples whom Kedar Laomer, excuse me, they are named among the peoples whom Kedar Laomer, Abraham's contemporary, defeated, and as one of the races whom the Israelites would dispossess. They are described in Deuteronomy 2 as a people great and many and tall as the Anakim. The etymology of the name is obscure. It may be connected with shades, ghosts, and taken in conjunction with the name Zamzumim, given them by the Ammonites, which means whisperers, murmurers. It may indicate the awe which they inspired by their gigantic stature. Ashtarot, see on 9, Edrei, east of the southern end of the Sea of Kinneret, in a slightly southerly direction. Salcah, to the east of Edrei, some identify it with Salcad on Yevel Horan, the Mount of the Druzes. The Geshurites and the Maacatites, Geshur lay to the east of the Sea of Kinneret, and Maacah east of the lake Hula, both in the Hermon range. Moses smote them, see Numbers and Deuteronomy, and Moses, the servant of the Lord. The phrase is repeated probably to emphasize that both the conquest and the allocation were by divine authority. Okay, let's see what ancient Israel has to say. So on page 59 in ancient Israel, and these are the kings of the land whom the Israelites struck down across the Jordan where the sun rises. The second half of the book of Joshua, which begins in the next chapter, there are 24 chapters, essentially abandons narrative to offer, after this catalog of conquests, a tabulation of the apportioning of the land according to tribal divisions. Only in the 3 concluding chapters do we return to narrative. The first 6 verses of this chapter report the victories of Moses over the sundry Transjordanian kings that are narrated in Numbers. The remainder of the chapter gives us a list of Joshua's victories west of the Jordan. Lake Kinnerot, as before, this is a variant form of Lake Kinneret or the Sea of Galilee. The remnant of the Rephaim, some scholars think this term originally referred to elite warriors. In biblical usage, it can mean either shades, which is scarcely a relevant sense here, or giants. In Deuteronomy 3, Og is reported to have possessed gigantic proportions. And on 60, Moses, servant of the Lord, gave it as an inheritance. By the time this material was edited, late in the 7th century BCE or in the 6th century, the Israelites no longer had possession of this Transjordanian region. The list thus serves as a kind of ideal map of sovereignty in times past. So we have a hint then, according to Alter, who's quoting biblical scholarly theory, the book of Joshua is edited around the time of the Babylonian conquest and the exile to Babylonia. Okay, so this is kind of a reminder then of what the land of Israel was like when the people were following God's ways and when God was acting on their behalf. In contrast to the time in which the book was edited, when the people had neglected God's ways and God's allowing the Babylonians to conquer Israel. And the northern kingdom of Israel had already been exiled to Assyria. So the land of Israel, as an Israelite nation, is a shadow of its former self. Yeah, Barry.
Among ultra-religious Jews, obviously Alter and biblical scholars will acknowledge that the Jewish Bible, including the original 5 books, were edited, redacted, had various different authors. But among religious Jews, do they accept that the subsequent books after the 5 books were man-made, were written down by men, not by God? Or is it assumed that those books were also written by God?
It's not assumed that the books are written by God, but it is assumed, I think, from traditional Jews that the subject matter being described in a period being described is when it happened, as opposed to thinking that it was some narrator from a later period in history remembering back to the time in which they're talking about, right? So I think traditional Jews think that what's described in Joshua happened at the time of Joshua. Okay, so, but when it comes to the sanctity of the text, Torah is the most sacred because of the tradition that God gave the Torah to Moses at Mount Sinai. The rest of the books were divinely inspired, right? So Joshua had a connection with God. All the judges described in the book of Joshua had a connection to God. Samuel had a connection. The prophets that are at the time of the kings in the book of Kings, all the prophets in the books of the prophets, et cetera, they're all divinely inspired. And we know that Jeremiah had a scribe of his own writing down what Jeremiah was saying to the people. So Baruch, son of Neriah, was the scribe for Jeremiah. So maybe, and the book of Jeremiah says that, so maybe the other prophets had their own scribes as well. So, but we don't know. There's scarce historic material about it. Okay, so we'll read 7 to the end of the chapter. Ve'ela malchei haaretz asher hika Yehoshua u'vnei Yisrael be'ever ha'yarden yama miBaal Gad bevik'at ha'Levanon v'ad ha'har hechalak ha'oleh se'ira vayitna Yehoshua l'shiftei Yisrael Yerusha kemachlekotam. And these are the kings of the land that Joshua and the people of Israel killed across the Jordan, westward, from Baal Gad in the Lebanon Valley to the smooth mountain, or it says the bare mountain, that rises in Seir, and which Joshua gave to the tribes of Israel as an inheritance according to their portions or divisions. Bahar uva shefela, uva arava, uva ashedot, uva midbar, uva negev, hachiti, ha'emori, ha'knani, ha'prizi, ha'chivi, ha'yevusi. So in the highlands and in the lowlands, in the Arava Valley, in the slopes, in the desert, and in the south, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. So this is all of their territory now. And who are these people? Melech Yericho Echad, Melech Ha'ai Asher Mitzad Beit El Echad, the king of Jericho, 1. So in other words, we're counting now one by one. So the king of Jericho, 1. The king of Ai on the side of Beit El, 1. Melech Yerushalayim Echad, Melech Hebron Echad. The king of Jerusalem, 1. King of Hebron, 1. Melech Yarmut Echad, Melech Lachish Echad. The king of Yarmut, 1. King of Lachish, 1. Melech Eglon Echad, Melech Gezer Echad. King of Eglon, 1. King of Gezer, 1. Melech Devir Echad, Melech Geder Echad. King of Devir, 1. King of Geder, 1. Melech Harma Echad, Melech Arad Echad. King of Harma, 1. King of Arad, 1. Melech Livna echad, Melech Adulam echad. King of Livna one, King of Adulam one. Melech Makeda echad, Melech Beit El echad. I don't think I have to translate anymore. We know what echad means. One. Melech means king. So Melech Tapuach echad, Melech Chefer echad. Melech Afek echad, Melech Lasharon echad. Melech Madon echad, Melech Chatzor echad. Melech Shimron Meron echad, Melech Achshaf echad. Melech Ta'anach echad, Melech Megiddo echad. Melech Kedesh echad, Melech Yoknaam LaKarmel echad. Melech Dor Lenafat Dor echad. Melech Goyim LaGilgal echad. Melech Tirza echad. Kol Melachim, all the kings, Shloshim v'achad, 31 kings defeated by Joshua and the people of Israel. So the commentary here.
But can I ask a question first?
Yes, Bess.
I thought Jerusalem was later. Wasn't established until
No,
later.
I think Jerusalem, we saw that in the previous chapter and the chapter before. So yeah, they conquered Jerusalem then, but who know, maybe in the book of Joshua, these people attack again. So even though it seems in Joshua that they're totally annihilated and we have total control, it's not the case because they managed to keep on fighting. So David, yes, conquered Jerusalem from the Jebusites in the book of Samuel. So why did he have to do that if Joshua says that they already had Jerusalem? So that's the best way I can answer it. So the commentary on the bottom of 70, westward, literally seaward, that is in the direction of the Mediterranean, the western boundary of the land. From Baal Gad, see on chapter 11. Excuse me. The wilderness, that is the uncultivated land serving as a pasture. This includes all such regions bordering the land on the east, for example, the wilderness of Judah, the wilderness of Beit Aven, etc. So in other words, according to the commentary, wilderness means uncultivated, it's not owned, it's not it's just wild, as opposed to being a desert. The south of Judah, including the territory of Simeon. The 31 kings, see on chapter 2, the city named in connection with each king was his capital, his realm comprising other towns and villages. Yarmut, see chapter 10, Eglon, see chapter 10, Gezer, chapter 10, Devir, chapter 10, Geder, a city not mentioned before. According to the Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Bible, this is Gerar, the Philistine city. Elijah of Vilna, that is, he's the Vilna Gaon from the 1600s, locates it on the slopes. Since it was located on a slope, it was necessary to construct a fence, hence the name Geder, meaning a fence. Okay. So for those who think it's really important to try to figure out where these cities are located, that's what they're trying to do. Chormah, see Numbers 21, for the meaning and origin of the name. For its conquest, see Judges 1. Arad, about 16 miles southeast of Hebron, it still bears this name. Livna, see chapter 10. Adulam, southwest of Bethlehem. Later it came into prominence as David's hiding place when he fled from Saul in 1 Samuel. Makedah, see chapter 10. Beit El, see chapter 8. Tapuach in Mount Ephraim, possibly on the site of the modern Tel Sheikh. Chefer, northeast of Shechem, near the coast. Afek, northeast of Jerusalem, south of the Yarkon, near the modern city of Petach Tikva. The Sharon, the plain which stretches from Mount Carmel southward to Jaffa. Some regard the Lamed in the Hebrew as part of the name and render the king of Lasharon. Madon Chatzor, see chapter 11. Shimron Meron, see chapter 11. Shimron Meron is probably identical with the Shimron mentioned there. The Assyriologist Sayce remarks that Samsimuruna is given by an Assyrian inscription as the name of a town in this neighborhood. Okay, Achshaf, see chapter 11. Tanakh Megiddo, in the valley of Jezreel, northeast of Jenin, and still called by these names. The latter is a few miles southeast of the former, midway between the Jordan and the coast. It was a famous fortress in antiquity. Kedesh Naphtali, a few miles northwest of Lake Kula. Others hold that it was a town in the valley of Jezreel, north of Taanach. Yokneam and Carmel, that is at the foot of Mount Carmel, now Tel Kaimun, near the modern Jewish settlement of Yokneam. Dor, see chapter 11. The king of Goyim in the Gilgal, that is the king of a district in the north called Goyim, whose capital was Gilgal. Called Goyim, whose today a village named Gilguli still stands there. An alternative translation is king of the nations belonging to Gilgal. On either interpretation, this is not the Gilgal between the Jordan and Jericho, nor the Gilgal north of Beit El. Tirzah, north of Shechem and east of Samaria and Mount Ephraim. Later, it was the capital of the northern kingdom and the royal residence of the kings from Jeroboam I to Omri. Its beauty was proverbial. All the kings 30 and 1. The preceding narrative did not give an account of all the battles in the campaign, those of minor importance being omitted. In the enumeration, we are provided with a complete list of the conquered kings. The first half of the book narrating the story of the conquest ends here, and the next section describes the allocation of the land to the tribes. Yes, Bess.
2 questions. First, are all the names given in Hebrew? Do they have Hebrew? Can we?
So the names of the kings are not given. The names of the
No, of the city, like Adullam. Is that Hebrew?
These, I don't know. It's a good question. I mean, he pointed out in one comment that one of the towns is known by a different name in Assyrian that's similar to it. So I don't know if these are original Hebrew names or they kept the original language and just adopted that when they became Israelite towns.
Like Jericho, I don't know. Is Jericho Hebrew?
I can't tell you, Bess.
That one, okay. The second thing is, this is 31 major battles, according to the last comment.
Right.
Do we have a timeline? Any idea? Is this 10 years, 2 years?
Don't know.
Okay.
Don't know. It doesn't, the book doesn't tell us. All it says is they happen quickly. But we don't know. I mean, realistically, who knows? Who really knows? I mean, the book describes it as happening quickly because of God's involvement in it. So if God's involved, maybe a war that should have taken decades took a couple of years instead, and that's seen as miraculous because of how quick it was done. I don't know. Some people see the America in the early 1800s under Thomas Jefferson stretching across America so quickly, manifest destiny as part of a theological plan as well, that God was on the side of the Americans as we defeated the Indians and acquired territory so quickly. So it depends on how you on your perspective.
It's still a major undertaking. They have to supply food and armor.
Again, this is why this is not a military account. This is a religious account where those details, what the people ate. You know, I was just reading in on the Times of Israel this morning. There's some postdoctoral fellow did research on the Roman army around the time of the destruction of the temple, and that there were anywhere between 4.5 and 7 million Jews in the Roman Empire, and many of them served in the Roman army. And there are records of what the daily portion was for a Roman soldier that was apportioned by the army, and then extra that the soldiers had to supply on their own. And there's thought that there were different Jewish units. Each unit was 8 soldiers. 8 soldiers counted as a unit, as well as a couple of slaves attached to that unit, and maybe there were Jewish 8-person units, and that they were part of the army that actually fought against Israel. And at the time that the temple was destroyed, so Jew was fighting Jew, both a Jew outside of the army fighting the Roman army, as well as Jew fighting Jew within the land of Israel itself. So it just adds to another layer. But I thought of that only because of the description there. There are sources that describe in great detail what the exact food was that the army, each soldier got. Joshua is not concerned with this. It's only concerned with the getting the land of Israel and apportioning it to the tribes. Yes,
So,
Barry.
so you just threw a whole new thing. I'm curious. Maybe the third question. I'll save this for last, but I'll ask it first. How does he base that there were Jewish units? Is that documented?
Just go to Times of Israel.
Times of
Scroll
Israel,
down
okay.
a little bit, you'll see.
Okay,
You-
so
you
what I
can-
was going to say before was that I believe it was Alter, sounds like it would be Alter, who had made a comment a few chapters back that a lot of these communities that had kings were actually very small.
Yes,
They weren't what we would now think of as major countries with large kingdoms.
right,
So-
right.
So the list, that could explain the list. The question that I had was one of the place names was Baal, something Baal, and isn't Baal that's one of the pagan gods, Baal?
So,
It was in the list.
there's Bethel. No, there's no Baal.
There was a place name.
In line 7, verse 7. God.
Baal God in the Lebanon Valley.
Yeah, so is that, I mean, would that, because that is a name for, isn't that the name of a pagan deity?
Yes.
So is there any thought that might have been like a holy city or a holy?
He ignores it.
Okay,
Alter ignores that, and our commentary ignored it also, so we don't know. It's a Baal God. See chapter 11, verse 17. So if I look there, Baal God, so called because it was the site of a shrine to the cult of God, the god of fortune, mentioned again in 12:7 and 13:5.
okay, so
That's
so
what
yeah, so
commentary says on page 66. Okay. Okay, so all Alter adds for us on page 60 in his book, The King of Jericho 1. This system of tallying is unusual. The evident aim is to arrive at a complete sum of all the conquests. Though, as we have seen, the historical reality of much of this account is in doubt, the numbering of 31 kings does accurately reflect the historical situation in which Canaan was splintered into a large number of city kingdoms, controlling quite small territories. Even if these rulers actually bore the title of king, they probably were closer to what today would be thought of as tribal warlords. This list obviously picks up names from the preceding narrative report, though it also includes several kings not mentioned earlier.
so he said it again. I mean, he had
Yeah,
said that
right.
once before. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Okay, I think we can do chapter 13. There's not much commentary on it. Well, at least in Alter. So let's see what we can do here. So now we're starting the second half of the book and starting to get into the apportionment of the land. V'Yoshua zaken ba bayamim, vayomer Adonai elav, ata zakanta bata bayamim, v'haaretz nish'ara harbe ma'od l'rishta. Joshua was getting old, up in years. That's how I would translate it. And God said to him, you have gotten old and up in years, and the land remains yet to be possessed. Much of the land still remains to be possessed. Zota aretz hanish aret. This is what's left. Kol glilot haplishtim v'chol hageshuri. All of the regions of the Philistines and the Geshurites, min hashihur asher al pnei Mitzrayim ve'ad givul Ekron tzafona laknaani techashev chameshet sarnei Flishtim ha'azati v'ha'ashdodi v'ha'eshkeloni hagiti v'ha'ekroni v'ha'avim. From Shihor, which is right against Egypt, to the border with Ekron, northward to the Canaanite, which is accounted and the Canaanites, 5 lords of the Philistines, the Gazites, the Ashdodites, the Ashkelonites, the Gittites, the Ekronites, and the Avim. Meiteiman kol eretz haknaani ume'ara asher latzidonim ad afeka ad gavul ha'emori. From the south, all the land of the Canaanites to Me'arah, which belongs to the Sidonites, to Afek, on the border with the Amorites. Ve'ha'aretz hagivli, ve'ha'aretz hagivli, v'chol ha'levanon, mizrach ha'shemesh, miba'al Gad, tachad har Hermon, ad levo Hamat. And the land of the Givlites and all of Lebanon, eastward from Baal Gad under Mount Hermon until Levo Hamat. Kol Yoshvei Hahar min HaLevanon ad Misrafot Mayim, Kol Tzidonim Anochi Orishem Mipnei Bnei Yisrael, Rak HaPileha LeYisrael B'Nachalak Asher Tziviticha. All the inhabitants of the land from Lebanon till Misrafot Mayim, all the Sidonites, I will drive out from before the people of Israel, only allot it to Israel as an inheritance, as I have commanded you. V'ata, and now, chalek et ha'aretz hazot b'nachala l'tishat ha'shevatim v'chatzi ha'shevet ha'menashi. And now, divide this land as an inheritance to the 9 tribes and a half of the tribe of Manasseh. So let's do the commentary up to here. So bottom of 73, Joshua was old. He had been one of the spies sent by Moses 45 years before. So now we think this commentary suggests that it's 5 years. It's been 5 years already since Moses died, right? Wandering in the desert for 40 years, right? And then it's 5 years later at this point. So it's been 5 years. How they know that? It says, see Caleb's statement in chapter 14, verse 7. So maybe from that, we know that it's been 5 years. He must have been of mature age at the time of the mission and was now over 80 years. According to Yalkut, he was 82 years old. We don't know. You know, if you believe the movie 10 Commandments, Joshua, John Derek in the 10 Commandments, right? He was Joshua, so he's just a little bit younger than Moses. So he could be 125 years old, for all we know. If he's 80, maybe, who knows? We don't know. We go on. So, Barbara, we read chapter 12 already, and now we just started chapter 13. I read the first 7 sentences in the Hebrew and English translation. Now we're looking at the commentary below the on 73.
What you missed.
Verses
No
2 to
need
5.
ask.
Verses 2 to 5 are in parentheses and define the unconquered territory. The continuation of God's words to Joshua begun in verse 1 are verses 6 and following. The regions of the Philistines. The Philistines occupied a narrow strip of the coastland from the Book of Egypt to Jaffa. The principal cities being, I think that means the Brook of Egypt. I think it's supposed to be the Brook of Egypt, not the Book of Egypt.
He's talking about Gaza, right?
Yes, so yes, which is kind of like El Arish, right around there is where that the Brook of Egypt is.
So-
So the
so-
Brook of Egypt, yeah,
Mine says Brook with an R.
okay.
So
So-
that's interesting because, you know, you've said repeatedly in other classes that Gaza was never part of Greater Israel, therefore
Right.
it's territory that can be given up. But according to what we just read, it's also part of what God gave the Israel.
No,
The-
this is what, this is a parenthetical note. And so it's unclear whether God is going to be giving the land of the Philistines to Israel or not.
Well,
And-
didn't God just say that there are still territories that haven't
Yes.
been taken, and the area of the Philistines is one of them?
Yes,
So
But
doesn't that
I'm gonna-
imply that that's supposed to be part of Greater Israel?
yes, but they never get it.
Okay,
Okay.
And
so
Gaza.
Book
It
of
says Gaza.
Judges and Samuel is going to point out back and forth battles with the Philistines and
Okay.
never acquiring the territory.
Okay.
Okay.
promise,
so
promise, but never given, therefore. It's
Right.
off limits.
again, Barry, it depends on how you want to interpret the text. If you're in the mindset of wanting to make peace and give up territory, then you can find your interpretation in the Bible to do that.
No,
If you're the
absolutely,
mindset-
absolutely. Yeah.
And if you're in the mindset not to do it, you can find the verses to back you up to.
I was just, I was just kind of trying to connect all the dots.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, so the comment goes on, the Philistines occupied a narrow strip of the coastland from the Brook of Egypt to Jaffa, the principal cities being Gaza, Ashkelon, Gath, Ashdod, and Ekron. Their original home may have been Egypt, whence they settled first in Crete and then in Canaan. See Amos 9, which gives an origin story, attaining to such importance that they gave their name to the country. Highly skilled in war, they were Israel's most powerful enemy and were not finally subdued until the reign of David. Even after that, they remained a thorn in their side until Judah Maccabee inflicted a crushing defeat upon them, after which they disintegrated and finally disappeared. So that's interesting that the Philistines stayed around until the time of Hanukkah, which is 165 BCE. So that's a long time for the Philistines to be around, 1,000 years or more. The Geshurites, a people in the extreme southwest of Canaan, reaching to the Egyptian border. They are not identified with the Geshurites in chapter 12. So these are different Geshurites. The Shihor, some define it as the eastern arm of the Nile, others as the Brook of Egypt, the Wadi El Arish, which flows into the Mediterranean between Gaza and Pelusium.
According to Asimov, Pelusium is a word for the Philistines. Or
If you want to
Philistines.
say that Philistines came from Egypt, what the previous comment suggested. So maybe it's based on that branch of the Nile where they lived.
Let's just
So
use it as an etymology thing.
Yeah, so Philistine, Pelusium, maybe that's the reason, but we don't know. Before Egypt, on the eastern border of Egypt and the southwest of Canaan. Ekron on the northeast border of Philistia. Akkar, an Arab village, is now found in the district. Is counted to the Canaanites and therefore included in the land promised to Abraham. Right, so this verse 3, that section. Yeah, from Ekron northward, that could be what's promised to us. The 5 lords, this explains that Philistia consisted of a confederation of the 5 city-states here enumerated, each of which was ruled by a lord. The Gazite, the lord of Gaza. The Ashdodite, the modern Ashdod, west of Beer-Tuvia. The Ashkelonite, Ashkelon lay on the coast between Ashdod and Gaza. It's now a heap of ruins called by the Arabs Ascalon, which is not true. It's not a heap of ruins. It's a major city called Ashkelon. The Gittite, some identify Fat with Arak el Menshiach, west of Beit Guvrim. Also the Avim, they alone of all the Canaanite tribes remained there when these were expelled by the Philistines. On the south, the ancient virgins connect this with the Avim reading, also the Avim on the south. The division of the verse in the Masoretic text may be retained as indicating this. The verses 2 and following treat of the southwest of Canaan, while on the south, all the land of the Canaanites refers to the south as distinguished from the southwest.
Excuse me?
Yes,
I thought Negev meant south, and I don't see, because that's my Hebrew ignorance, I don't see Negev in the Hebrew.
Taman,
Also means south? They both
Yes.
south?
yes.
Why does,
Why? So it's a geographic place name, the Negev Desert, which was in the south. So Negev is both a place name and the south. Taman is Yemen. Yemen is the furthest south you can go at that time in ancient times. You go down to the bottom of Saudi Arabia is Yemen. So that's also seen as south, as a word for south. Okay, why there's no place name for east or no place name for north? You only have south having 2 place names, or west. Well, west you have the Mediterranean Sea, so that's called Yama, to the sea. So you have west and south have place names that could also be a direction. So the land of the Canaanites, that is the region of Arad, which is by the wilderness of Paran, Zin, and Kadesh. And Me'erah, some understand Me'erah as a proper noun, the name of a place which has not been identified. Others render, and the cave that belongs to the Zidonians, perhaps a cave well known in those days as a place of retreat from the enemy. Afek at the mouth of the river Adonis, at the root of Lebanon, at the foot of Lebanon. Its modern name is Afaka. To the border of the Amorites, the border of the territory of Og in the northeast of Transjordan. Sichon and Og were both called kings of the Amorites. The land of the Gebalites. The entire land was named for the city Gebal, now called Jabil, a famous Phoenician seaport approximately 70 kilometers north of Sidon. Its inhabitants were renowned as builders. The ancient Greeks called it Byblos. Baal Gad, see on 11, unto the entrance of Hamat, often mentioned as the ideal boundary of Israelite territory in the north. See Numbers 34, Amos 6. The Targumim, Jonathan, the Aramaic translation, Yerushalmi, Rav Yosef, identified this with Antioch, the ancient capital of Syria, now in southern Turkey. So that's quite a distance to claim that is part of the original land of Israel. And Antioch was just destroyed by the earthquake a couple months ago. According to later scholars, such as Uvat Haaretz, it is Hama in Syria, 180 kilometers north of Damascus. Misrafot Mayim, see chapter 11. Them will I drive out after your death. Only allot thou it unto Israel, and subsequently each tribe will conquer what fell into its lot. Each tribe was now strong enough to conquer the enemy within its borders. According to Maimonides, the division was necessary to give subsequent conquests communal status. Divide this land. The psychological danger of fighting indefinitely without tangible fruits of the conquest was evident. The tribes had to be given a sense of ownership. Therefore, the division without delay was imperative. On the other hand, the division would tend to loosen national ties. Tribes would come more and more to think of their own territories and less nationally. So long as Joshua lived, this tendency was suppressed. But with his death, it clearly manifested itself, as is evident from the book of Judges. All right, so in other words, what this parenthetical note is teaching is that from now on, we're going to get a sense that tribes are in it for themselves and how difficult it was to unite all the tribes as one nation pursuing one common goal. And this land, the land of Canaan, whether conquered or not, in respect to the unconquered land, the division would act as a stimulus to still greater efforts. And let's see, alter on this section. Very much of the land remains to take hold of. There is a tension between the section that begins here and the previous account of Joshua's conquest. In the preceding chapters, one gets the impression of a grand sweep of victories in which the Israelite forces led by Joshua took town after town, virtually the whole land. But the audience of this narrative was well aware that there were substantial regions of the land that for long periods were not controlled by the Israelites, and this awareness is registered here. All the provinces of the Philistines, in fact, the Philistines did not establish their Pentapolis along the Mediterranean shore, having arrived perhaps from the Aegean, until a generation or more after the putative time of Joshua. Overlords, the Hebrew seren is in all likelihood a loan word from the Philistine language. Some scholars think it is a cognate with the Greek tyrannos. The Avites, these are an indigenous Canaanite people bordering on Philistine territory who remained unconquered by the Philistines. From Arah, the received text reads, and from Arah. Arah is not a known place name, and some amend it to Akko, which was a Sidonian town. Strenuous scholarly efforts have been made and will not be recapitulated here to identify all the towns and regions. Some names in the list nevertheless defy identification, and there are elements in the geographical indications that seem scrambled. The 9 tribes and the half tribe of Manasseh, these are the tribes that settled west of the Jordan, the other 2.5 tribes remaining on the east side of the Jordan. All right, it's 10:25. We'll stop here for today. We will be meeting the next several Fridays, but the Friday of Memorial Day weekend happens to be the first day of Shavuot. So we will not meet then. And I'm thinking that that will be the end of our studies for the year. And we'll pick up again after the summer in September. Okay, so the Friday, so like Friday that is it the night? What is today? The 5th. So Friday the 18th, May 18th will be our last Friday to meet. Okay, so have a good rest of the day, everybody, and see you next week.
Okay.
Good shot.
Yeah, Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat shalom.